Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Well, Phil, I have a man cold.
You have a man cold. Well, that's
I
what
have
comes
a man
from
cold.
Grandparenting.
Yes. I've picked up a bug, and I'm powering through. You'll be pleased to know.
You're powering through. So we are, just a bit of a disclaimer, because we are recording fairly early this week for the Saturday headlines. So, but weirdly, there's still a jam-packed show of headlines, and it is fairly early on in the week. So, a bit of a disclaimer that there may be some big stories that might hit in later in the week, but I'm sure Curtis will pick that up next week, won't you, Curtis?
Yes, because you won't, will you? Why are we recording early this week, Phil?
I'm having a little holiday. I'm at phase 3 of packing.
Ah.
I'm at phase 3 now. So we'll go through certain phases of my packing, as I'm being told. But I'm at phase 3 of my packing process, and we should be ready to go. Yeah, so I'm on holiday. So we've got your co-host returning next week.
Yes, Carl Davis will be back. So looking forward to that. So enjoy your holiday. But we've got a show to get together now, haven't we?
We have. So I think to begin with, and a name that will probably be synonymous with a lot of listeners as an outcome of the Thursday's election or Friday morning's results, is that somebody's got into an MP now, Curtis.
Yeah, I'm delighted by this story. I mean, this really is the big election story for me, as far as I'm concerned. And as you say, many listeners will be aware of this new MP. His name is Perran Moon. Mm-hmm. So he's the duly elected Labour representative for the good people of Camborne, Redruth and Hale down in Cornwall, which is a part of the world I know very well because as a toddler, I grew up in Redruth. So, I was really, really delighted to hear this news. Now, Perran, his background in automotive, and listeners will remember him, no doubt, from his days at Mannheim, when he was group marketing director. He was B2B marketing director at Auto Trader. He was the founder of AutoSwat, and more recently, chief marketing officer of Believe, which is the EV charge point operator. So we're in this unique position, Phil, I would suggest, where we have a member of parliament who knows something about the automotive.
There is that, yes. Yeah.
Which is rather exciting.
Yeah, maybe that's where we have the opportunity to reach out to Perran and have these discussions. And I'm not sure they're allowed to come on podcast. They are allowed to come on podcast because they do their own, don't they, as we well know. So,
in fact, it's difficult keeping them off podcast.
It is these days, isn't it? Yes, yeah. Which ones do you listen to?
Yeah.
Maybe that is a shout out, Perran, as hopefully you'll be listening to this week's podcast and you are a listener to the Motor Trade Radio. So that's an invite. If you do fancy coming onto the podcast, then please do take that as an open invitation. It'll be great to have you on. And I think, as Curtis clearly says there, that knowledge of extensive knowledge of the automotive industry, but having somebody within Parliament that has that knowledge is it's fairly unique, I think, in my what I'm known.
Oh, definitely.
MPs. So fantastic, and congratulations.
And we'll put him in touch with the Transport Secretary, which will be one of our stories this week. So we'll make that connection. We'll link them in together.
Yes, for definite. And this week as well, we're going to share a snip from this partway through today's podcast, but hopefully on Tuesday morning of this week you managed to listen to the exclusive interview that we did with Victor Zhang, who is the UK country manager of OMODA and JAECOO, which are the brands that sit under Chery. And it's a fascinating, very open, very honest interview there with Victor, and he shares some of their UK launch plans for both the brands, talks around the pricing of the brands, and obviously then talks a little bit about the potential investment and growth opportunities for the brand.
Yeah, and Phil, sorry, I don't know if you said, but it was an exclusive. It's Victor's first podcast interview. He's done a bit of radio, done a bit of television, but his first podcast interview was with us, and it really is a fascinating insight into the launch plans of a new brand. And we will be returning to new brands later in today's podcast.
But it was also in Shanghai, in Wuhu, in China at the time of recording, which actually was quite weird because it was quite a perfect quality conversation there with Victor, wasn't it?
Yeah, better than sometimes the quality we get from each other. So
You're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors.
So headlines this week come from AM, Motor Finance, Fleet News and Automotive News Europe. We've gone all thematic this week and have a podcast of effectively three parts. So firstly, we'll start with a roundup of some of the election news impacting the sector, including a lowdown on the new Transport Secretary and the industry response to what it would like to see from the new Labour government. Then, after the break, we'll have an extract from our OMODA and JAECOO interview and follow it with some news about new entrant Chinese brands, and we'll wrap up today's pod with some OEM people on the move.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. If you're a supplier and would like us to profile your business and reach our audience of dealer bosses, managers and decision makers on one of our dedicated supplier specials episodes, get in touch with Curtis and Philip at motortraderadio@yahoo.com.
So starting with Fleet News, and the headline there is Louise Haigh named Transport Secretary in new government. So Louise Haigh has been appointed as new Transport Secretary, having held the Shadow Transport Brief since 2021. Prior to that, she was shadow brief for the Northern Ireland Secretary, and the former Special Constable was also a shadow policing minister under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. So a bit about her background there. Interestingly, Richard Smith, Managing Director of the Road Haulage Association, congratulated Haigh on her appointment as Secretary of State for Transport, saying, "We look forward to continuing our good working relationship with her team in the months and years ahead to support our vital industry and to help deliver economic growth." So there's that's welcome news, actually, that they've actually made that connection. They've been talking before the election, and hopefully the team there, Louise Haigh and her team, will hit the ground running.
Yeah, I think one thing has become a little bit clearer since the result, and obviously we start to see who's doing what. Seems like that, with the potential result of the election, it gave Labour the opportunity to get things in place and ready to sort of start running into it. That's becoming very, very clear, because I think Miliband is taking on the responsibility of the net zero strategy, isn't he, as well. So the kind of things that you've been seeing already within the Labour Party, and obviously in terms of the key strategies going forward, it seems like that there is a bit of a plan in place, which I think has been very positively received.
Yeah, and there's another comment in this particular story from James Court, who's the chief exec of the Electric Vehicle Association. And he's saying EVA looks forward to working with the Transport Secretary to make these prospects a reality, ensuring our charging and support networks develop at pace and that new EV drivers remain just as satisfied. And as we said earlier, it'll be good if she has a couple of conversations with our good friend Perran Moon as well.
Yes, it's all starting to come out. So we've gone from a no election podcast last week to quite a bit this week, as you can well imagine. So moving on to some industry comments on the election result, and this is a story that was covered in AM Online, and this is industry shifts focus to Labour's automotive policies following election victory, and this is obviously around thinking about the importance of the UK automotive sector to the UK, and sort of making sure that Labour have a key focus on the sector, and that this is coming from Mike Hawes, who you'll know as Chief Executive of the Society for Motor Manufacturers, that is signalling its support for the bespoke approach by achieving net zero, which will, under the right conditions, could also deliver economic growth. So clearly, business growth, economic growth is a key strategy for the incoming government. But clearly, Mike's trying to, the importance and value that the automotive has within that economic growth for the UK. He's trying to put there as a priority to the new Labour government.
Yeah, and this piece, it is quite analytical of what's really what's on the agenda now that we have a new government, and it's written by Amy Turner at AM, because she actually makes the point that the car retailing sector as an employer employs 78% of the 758,000 people working in the automotive sector, generating annual turnover of £100 billion. And she goes on to say automotive retailers will now focus on how Labour plans to address the factors which most impact their business, and just as importantly, the speed at which it will deliver. So it's definitely worth looking at this piece from AM, because it collects together various comments from the industry and adds a bit of analysis to it as well.
It does, yeah. I mean, it's got people in there from like Ian Plummer from Auto Trader. You got Sue Robinson in there from the NFDA, amongst many others. So clearly trying to pull together the views and what the incoming government should be considering for the automotive sector. So it's various different sectors through, where that's through haulage, logistics, through to that motor retail sector. Where we need to obviously keep the automotive sector, as I said previously, as a priority for the incoming government for initiatives and investment to help support that economic growth.
Yeah, and I guess one of the keys to this is that we know from Labour when they were in opposition, and certainly when they were running for election, that within their manifesto they said they would reintroduce the ban on the sale of new ICE vehicles starting from 2030, after the previous government had put it back. And I'm sure we'll come on to that with the next story, but that's really highlighted it, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. And I think that's there is a lot going on, because within that manifesto, they talked about support for EV adoption. They talked about economic and industry support within the automotive sector, and they also talked about local transport improvements as well. So there is there's quite a bit in the manifesto that did relate to the automotive sector. So yeah, I think clearly trying to pull that out as a key opportunity for us going forward.
And before we go on to the next story, how late did you stay up for the election, Phil?
Not that late. I knew the next day I'd have enough coverage and. So, yeah. What about yourself?
1:30.
Did you?
Yeah, well, I thought definitely stay up for the exit polls, and because it was such a bombshell, I thought I don't know what more of this. And my son was home at the time as well, so we stayed. Wait, I left him to it. He stayed up all night. we crossed paths at about 6 o'clock in the morning. He was going to bed. I was getting up.
There was some that were just really, really set up, even to the point they were bringing the kettle and everything into the front room in front of the TV, so they didn't have to get up to make cups of coffee and things like
Yeah,
this. So there
it,
was some real big followers of it.
yes, it's when all the announcements came on top of each other, and it was very difficult to keep up with it because there was so many things happening, so many seats changing, and so many big names not getting re-elected. So it was a fascinating and entertaining night.
But it's still happening at 7 o'clock in the morning, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Because there was still fallouts early morning, but no, I think a lot coming from it. And the last story that we've got on the election is in Motor Finance Online, and this comes from the Vehicle Remarketing Association, which is kind of covering what we've just said previously, that we know that within the remarketing sector that the challenge at the minute is centered around electrification, around when do you invest, how much do you invest. There's a lot of investment required in infrastructure, charging facilities, in terms of physical facilities, in terms of auctions. A lot of investment around transportation, the collection, movement of electric vehicles, and everything else that comes within that. And the VRA were really trying to highlight that there is a case, and however this is done, which is the bit that we don't know yet, around supporting the sector in this transformation to an electrified used vehicle park. Because we talk a lot about new, but it's that used vehicle park that trying to call out to the UK government.
Yeah, and without being sort of party political, I think this is welcome news for the industry, because we have a new government in place that hopefully will be receptive and will be listening to the wants and needs of the industry, especially, as you say, as we sort of ramp up that electrification. So hopefully more receptive than than the last lot. but frankly, it really wouldn't take much, would it? There's some important decisions that need to be made, and hopefully we've now got someone in place who can actually sort of address some of these concerns of the industry, boost the infrastructure, and just make it a little bit easier for everyone to make that switch than it is at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. We'll be keeping an eye on it very closely as they get through the dossiers and understand what they're going to do next.
So after the break, we'll be back with an extract from our exclusive podcast interview with Victor Zhang, the UK country manager for OMODA and JAECOO.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast
feed. As we speak, orders have actually opened for OMODA, with deliveries starting, I believe, in August, while JAECOO launches at this month's Goodwood Festival of Speed, with UK deliveries scheduled for late 2024. Can you take us through how your launch plans are actually going for both brands in the UK?
Yeah, so I think OMODA and JAECOO actually are two brands, and we just get these new brands since I think over 1 year ago, and but of course these two brands are under the whole Cherry Group, but these are two new brands. So the OMODA brand actually is it's more for crossover. We are looking for fashion, futuristic, this kind of feeling. And it's being launched with over 20 countries at least now globally, and especially in Europe, we just launched in Spain in February, and with the one model we call OMODA 5 petrol, and this one model already got over nearly 900 registration per month now in Spain, just in Spain, and we will launch OMODA brand also in other European countries like Italy, Poland, Austria, Netherlands very soon. And for UK, we'll be possibly end of August. But of course, we have started the order taken now, but we will start the delivery in August. And yeah, for JAECOO will be a little bit later. JAECOO's a little bit higher positioning, and JAECOO will be a little bit later. But for the both brands, they are all for Europe. So no matter it's UK or Spain or Italy or Germany, we are all using OMODA and the JAECOO brands. So this is some basic information about these two brands. And we want to provide the most the best products for the UK market. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. And in terms of, I mean, you say OMODA is the more sort of fashion orientated brand. How are you actually positioning JAECOO? Is that more of a premium brand?
Yes. So in terms of the positioning, so I think JAECOO is higher than OMODA. Although we have these both brands in the one same showroom, but it's a totally different layout for the two brands. And JAECOO we positioning as a more premier for elite, for the successful people, So
Yes.
it's a more I think it's a more like a Range Rover feeling, So this is my understanding. And for
Yeah.
OMODA is more crossover fashion, so it's more related to mass audience, like Korean brands that we are targeting at, like Hyundai Kia.
And Victor, I mean, you've touched on there, obviously, in terms of UK, Europe, and the difference of the rollout plans against OMODA and JAECOO for the UK market. But for the UK, for those listeners today that aren't part of your initial rollout and the early onboarding of your products, can you give us an idea of which are the first models they're expected to see on sale within both those brands in the year, and indications on the sort of price points? Because obviously, anything at the minute is obviously all about this price point and entry point to the sector.
Yeah. So for OMODA, the first model will be called OMODA 5. So OMODA 5, we have OMODA 5 petrol engine. So and also we have OMODA 5 EV. We call it OMODA E5. Okay, so we have two versions. Okay, one is petrol, one is EV. So these two models are the first to come to UK market, and we have already shipped them to UK now. So we will start the delivery in August. So this is the first two models, OMODA 5, and the price wise, I think OMODA 5 petrol, I think should be starting from 24,000 pound, and EV I think we're around 30 to 33,000 to start with. I mean, this is the list price. Okay, so so this is some basic information about these two models. Okay, and
And
for JAECOO, the first model we'll call the J7. So J7 is so we will also display this model in the Goodwood Speed Festival, and so this model will be, I think it will be delivered by late this year. And the price wise, I think we haven't decided yet, but should be higher. So I'm thinking about 30 plus. Okay, 30 plus position for this car. Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds like that you'd probably, anyone listening to this morning's podcast would be eagerly waiting to obviously see that vehicle and that price point in terms of that more premium model. But thinking about, obviously, you've mentioned it there in terms of both EV and petrol plug-in hybrid products, and we know the questions at the minute, particularly in the UK, around the ZEV mandate for the manufacturers. What's your thinking around sort of entering the UK with petrol variants as well as the plug-in hybrids, in addition to the electric vehicle variants?
I think this is based on our analysis or understanding about the UK market. So So firstly, we fully respect the decision or the mandate by the UK government to introduce and to embrace the EV transition, which is definitely something we will do. So that's why we also have strong EV lineup. But in the meanwhile, we think, since the infrastructure, everything is not fully ready, so we still think customer has the right to choose more options, right? Like if they want to still choose petrol or plug-in hybrid, so we are able to provide them with these options. So this is something like we provide a variety of power options to the end customer, let them to choose. For us, we all think they are very important, and we will follow the government's, like this EV policy. So gradually we will have more and more EV products. But in the short term, in the first 1 or 2 years, we still believe that there's still a market for the petrol and the plug-in hybrid, and that can really, I think, to meet the some of the customers' demand. So this is the logic behind this product lineup.
Well, I mean, just that, and it's quite a slightly longer snippet than we'd normally share on the Saturday headlines, but I think we felt it was worthwhile to get the 2 points across. One about their UK growth and strategies for entering the UK in terms of timelines and by brands, but secondly, Curtis, talking through some of that price strategies. I mean, Victor saying that they haven't decided yet, and previously said it's coming to the UK by the end of 2024.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's unusual to have an OEM boss sharing their thoughts on pricing ahead of launch. So he was saying with the first JAECOO model, he's thinking of £30,000, but it could be slightly under, it could be slightly more. And it was. I think that just shows how open he was over the course of the interview, and the rest of the interview is really just as revealing, because he gives quite a bit of detail on representation, UK representation, the number of dealers that they're looking for by the end of this year. And then we asked him, well, what about next year? What about the next 5 years? And I came away with a really sort of clear understanding of how OMODA and JAECOO are going to be launched in the UK and where they're going, what their aspirations are.
100%. And I think that, the first half of the show, we're focusing on the election. That does play into these kind of conversations with people like Victor around, how important the UK is to these manufacturers, how there is opportunities for the UK government to, work with these Chinese OEMs to stimulate investment and particularly around that industrial strategy. Because, they say we won't spoil the full interview there with Victor, but do check that out from your podcast feed on Tuesday morning, because he does talk around their potential growth plans, and they'd be open for opportunities that present themselves, which is we're starting to see that, and kind of segues into our next section, doesn't it, in terms of some of the stories coming out from BYD over the weekend.
Yeah, it's almost as though we planned it this way, Phil. So the next headline is from AM Online, and it's BYD scores highest for brand recognition. Challenge remains for other new marks. So this is all based on research done by JudgeService, and I did help them with the B2B comms on this. So I did actually see the research, and it really is fascinating, because what they did was they took 1,244 owners to measure their perceptions and awareness of these new entrant brands. So not just the Chinese brands, but brands from Vietnam and America, because Fisker is in the mix there as well. And what they did was they measured the levels of spontaneous awareness and also the levels of prompted awareness. So the story leads with BYD, because they had the highest of any other brand in terms of spontaneous awareness at 13%, followed by Polestar at 4%, NIO at 4%, Geely at 2%. And then other brands below that really do drop down to 1%, 0%. And in fact, OMODA, they only scored 1%, which is kind of understandable at the moment because, although OMODA, in our interview with Victor, he does actually mention about the big dealer groups that he's partnering with. But I think as we speak, you can't actually walk into an OMODA dealership and orders start soon.
No, I think you're right. I think what, from my perspective on this, I think, if you think about BYD, put aside the length of time that they've been going as a business and as a potential EV or as a car maker, never mind just not just EV, but, in the short time that they've been here in the UK, and the speed in which they are moving. If you're watching the Euros at the minute, they're all over in terms of that branding. I think clearly yes, the question was always about how would these new entrants build a brand? How would they, get themselves into the consumer as a recognised brand? But I think this research is highlighting they are doing that. They're moving very quickly, and it's very quickly in a very short period of time.
Yeah, definitely. And you're absolutely right with the Euros, because you can't watch a match at the moment without being bombarded with BYD advertising on the pitch and during the ad breaks. And, that really is money well spent. BYD have, chosen wisely there. A brilliant piece of marketing.
Yeah, and there's a final paragraph in the release, and this is coming from Neil Adley, saying that BYD is undoubtedly leading the way for new entrants. From what we know of its ambitious plans to grow sales and dealer representation in the UK, its innovative approach to new products and plans to build cars in Europe, it is a brand on the move. And that was Neil Adley quoted there. So I think, that is clear. And you just think about the conversation earlier with Victor Zhang from Chery or OMODA and JAECOO. They're doing this very quickly. They're making decisions very quickly in terms of what they want to do. And I say you have to listen to the full interview on your podcast feed to the back end of the interview there with Victor. That it sort of indicates to things that they may be open to in the future there.
And staying with BYD, because the next headline comes from Automotive News Europe, and the headline there is China's BYD to build $1 billion EV plant in Turkey, report says. So as we discuss this on the podcast, I don't think anything's actually been confirmed, but that they've got some really good sources on this particular story, because it says Turkey will soon unveil an agreement with BYD for the construction of this $1 billion plant in the west of the country. And this really is the way that the market will evolve. We will see more of these new entrant brands building locally, building in Europe, which certainly is a way to get past tariffs, but it's more economical, a sort of smarter way of manufacturing and delivering product if you can do it locally.
Yeah, and we know that BYD have been buying plants across Europe, across Brazil actually, and buying sort of ex-Ford plants across the Brazilian market there. And I think there is a quote in here or a comment in here saying the new plant may give BYD easier access to the European Union, and with which Turkey has a customs union agreement, and saying the EU has obviously increased tariffs on imported of Chinese EVs, hitting BYD with an additional 17.4% charge on top of the existing 10% rate. So just to your point there, this gives them options. It gives them, financial options to remain competitive. But again, to your point, makes them a little bit more efficient through local markets as well. So, again, clearly there is growth and opportunities here with these Chinese brands that, as I said earlier, they're moving very, very swiftly across the European and UK, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. And going back to our interview with Victor Zhang from Cherry, OMODA and JAECOO, he actually referenced the plant in Spain that Cherry have bought. So Cherry is likely to become the first Chinese OEM to actually manufacture cars in Europe. And that was actually a former Nissan plant in Barcelona, which was vacated in 2021. So, they're repurposing that. It just shows the sort of clear thinking intent. And I was going to say lack of red tape, but I don't know if you know what I mean, but they don't seem to be bogged down in the sort of nitty gritty of doing things. They're just getting on with it.
Yes, yeah. And again, apologies. If you heard that, even in that little snippet there, that fine, we'll adhere to the policies, we'll adhere to the mandates and the regulations. That's not a problem. The tariffs in Europe, BYD recently saying that's fine. Okay, put the tariffs on, we'll absorb it, we'll carry on. They're just adapting, aren't they, to whatever is thrown at them, which is positive.
They're showing the sort of the flexibility that maybe some of the legacy brands, they can't respond that quickly, and I'm sure the legacy brands are working on it, but these new brands really are getting things done quickly.
And it's, just finally on that point, and just because it was something I've heard recently, and I think, and it's not just the Chinese brands, but somebody was saying that they drive Tesla, and that, every day you're getting over-the-air updates on your Tesla. And the new manufacturers, the incumbent sort of legacy manufacturers, saying, when are you thinking of doing it? We'll do an update once a quarter. Yeah. Really? Tesla doing them every day?
Yeah.
This is the way the market's now moving. So we'll keep an eye on it. Moving on to our final section of today's podcast, and just finishing off in here, but a couple of people movements, and there's a bit of a theme with this one as well. There's seems to be a common theme appearing in terms of these movements as well, isn't there, Curtis?
Yeah, these two stories are linked. It's almost as though there's a revolving door at Peugeot and Renault. So starting with AM Online, the headline there is new boss at Peugeot UK as Adam Wood quits Stellantis. So Stellantis has appointed a new managing director for Peugeot UK. And that's as Adam Wood has resigned after nearly 2 years in the role. Now, Adam Wood has moved on to Renault, where he's become the new UK MD, which will be in the next story that we talk about. But this is really very much about Ulrich Druce, who's the new head of Peugeot UK. Druce has worked within Stellantis since 2001, so very much a career man there, having started his career with Peugeot as a trainee. So he'll report into Stellantis UK Managing Director Maria Grazia Zavino, who said, "I'm delighted to welcome Ulrich to the Peugeot UK team. His depth of experience will prove invaluable and help ensure the continued progress of the brand in the UK market with its dealer network and partners." And I'm sure Ulrich has been in the UK before. Certainly a name I recognise from the past.
It has, yeah. I've had some conversations with you. Really nice, really knowledgeable, really focused, and he does echo sort of Maria's view on things for the future. So, and our friend of the podcast, Robert Forrester, he obviously knows him well within his car division, and he was always very supportive and sort of how good Ulrich is, and really he's a nice guy. He's Ulrich. Maybe we get him on the podcast at some point. He can have a chat with us.
Yeah, definitely. So the next part of this musical chairs story is Julien Sicard, Managing Director of Renault UK. will head back to his homeland this autumn to take on the new role of Vice President of the Renault brand for the market area of France. So he's actually been the UK boss since January 2022, which is sort of fairly typical of Renault, that they do tend to rotate their MDs every 2 or 3 years. And of course, they do like to keep them within the company. So from October the 1st, Adam Wood, ex-Peugeot from the last story, will become the new managing director of Renault UK and the country manager for Renault Group UK, which includes Dacia and the Alpine brand. So that's a good move there for Adam Wood. I suspect, he's effectively going to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond, rather than being part of the the massive Stellantis operation. So as part of his brief, he'll be in charge of 3 brands there.
Yeah, and I thought you'd like that. I thought you'd pull this one out, Curtis, that's covered in the story, that Renaulution 5-year strategy.
Renaulution, I like it.
Which is Renault Group's described as a new era for its business. So that was back in January 2022 that they'd launched their 5-year Renaulution strategy for their new vision. So, I think big roundup of headlines there. Say we played you a slightly longer clip from the interview with Victor Zhang, who is the UK country manager of OMODA and JAECOO. But please do head back to the full interview if you've not had a chance to listen to that already. It's in your podcast feed from Tuesday of this week. But a little bit of politics in there, a little bit of people movement, and a lot about the new world of the new entrants, Curtis.
Yeah, definitely. But that's all for now. We've got to let Phil go and start phase 4 of his packing. I suspect that there'll be at least 10 phases of that, Phil.
There will, yes. I have my instructions, yes. There's lists and all sorts of things, Curtis.
Yep. So we wish you a good holiday. I'll be following you intently on Instagram to see what you're dining out on, because you do like to share photographs of your meals and drinks.
Tends to be when everybody puts me on 30-day sleep mode. Curtis.
Oh, right. That's a good prompt for our listeners.
The first image of a G&T with a set of big glasses next to him at the airport is the first sort of note that everyone goes, right, snooze.
Yes.
Holiday snooze.
So have a great holiday. Many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. Until next weekend, when I'm joined by Carl Davis, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.